Thank you for listening to this PYA webinar recast. PYA is pleased to offer this alternative way to access our thought leadership. This is a recording of a previously delivered webinar. The information is accurate as of the date of the original event. The video recording, slides, and associated material for this and all PYA webinars are available on our website at pyapc.com. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as legal advice or an official opinion.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of PYA's Healthcare Regulatory Roundup webinar series. Today's topic is AI-enabled medical devices, new FDA draft guidance, and cybersecurity insights. PYA is happy to present today's webinar on this important topic. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenters, Barry Mathis and John Cross.
Thank you so much. It is a great pleasure to be with you again today. Many of you have heard me speak before. Some may have heard John, but John and I go way back over 30 years. We were both young, excited Marines. And instead of digging holes and throwing grenades, John and I were writing code and things with the Marine Corps at Quantico. So we share that experience together and have wound up in the same industry and now partners in the firm together. So this is a real treat for us to get to present together. You'll notice that I talk more than John. That's always been that way. And before he tells you, yes, he was a bit better coder than I was. So there you have that. But I didn't fall back as far in the runs, I don't think, as John did. So today's agenda, and I'll let John talk a little bit, introduce himself here in a minute, but I'm going to go through the agenda real quick. We are talking about artificial intelligence in medical devices and biomed devices and some of the FDA guidance and things that are going out. We're going to give you a little bit of overview. And some of this, I realize, you've heard it so many times, every presentation around AI, but we hope we can bring something a little unique, a little new to it that makes it interesting to you. Maybe you learned something you didn't know before, but we will again talk about the definition of AI and some history and some use cases. And then specifically an overview of the FDA guidance around the Internet of Medical Things. And we're going to weave in there some cybersecurity stuff because that's a place that's very near and dear to our hearts in terms of, as well as it's being used, how is it also vulnerable as you do it, and what kind of things should you be doing to protect for that, and some guidance around that. We're going to give you a little bit of a use case, a case study, if you might, theoretically, on how this might happen, and then maybe speak about a couple of cases where that theory is actually in reality today. That's how fast things are moving. And then some conclusions and recommendations, and we'll go from there. We hope you enjoy today. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. We can follow up with you after the session. We'll get somebody back in touch with you. And with that, I'm going to, John, if you'll move it forward. We're going to start with a little bit of that history of AI and some use cases there. So moving on, there's our cool little AI picture there. Great. Let's talk about the timeline. Let me first start with some cybersecurity. We're kind of backing it. We'll talk cybersecurity, and then we'll go into the AI. I won't spend a lot of time here, but I've got a lot of experience in that space. I've done a lot of work with clients over the years, and I'm going to age myself because I'm going to talk about some of the first cybersecurity investigations and mitigations that I ever experienced. For those of you who grew up with 286 computers and Microsoft Windows 3.1, when you booted that computer up, it had an autoexec.bat, which was a batch file, which is a series of commands to the system to load up certain files in a certain order. And what would happen is that bat file would get replaced, and it would have a screen, literally just a screenshot that says, your machine's been locked down, call this number. That was the first extortion and virus attempt. And it wasn't a virus. All you had to do was replace the bat file or take that out and you're done. You've solved the whole problem. That's how easy cybersecurity was back in the 80s. So from that, it progressed into, viruses. And Today, those viruses are easy to detect because we use definition files, because those viruses have DNA, things that the virus software of the old, when Norton first came along and some others, it would simply recognize the DNA of that, says, oh, it has a footprint. I know what that is. I'll quarantine that. Well, those days are gone as well, but that was kind of cool. Then we had worms that would embed themselves in and create things and send things forward. Trojans, which is, it looked like a cat on the screen, but ooh, you click it, it's actually a virus or a worm that comes in there. We remember all of those. So all of that up to, if you put everything behind us and how quickly it's come to what it is now, which is the viruses today. We still call them viruses in some cases, but most of the time it's malware, malicious software, malware, right? And the one that we're most familiar with is ransomware. And ransomware, today's payloads, and from a cybersecurity perspective, guys like John and I, we look at attack vectors, meaning how are they getting to you? What is the vehicle for that? Is it email? Is it a text? Is it smishing or phishing? And then what is the payload? What are they dropping off in hopes that you open it? And what's it going to deliver when you do? Well, those things are still being used, and even reverting back to some of that because it seems like an easy thing to do. It's very hard these days for bad actors and very expensive to get through your firewalls. We have so many layers. And I have talked for years on cybersecurity being kind of like going out in the cold, right? If I'm just running to the mailbox on a winter morning, I'm probably not covered up like an Eskimo. I'm just going there and back. Same thing with data. If I'm just managing a little bit of data and I'm not in the data space very long, then the virus protection firewall is not that big a deal. But if I'm going to the North Pole, I probably have layers and layers and layers and layers of clothes to protect me from what's an extended amount of time. Same thing with cybersecurity. The closer you get to sensitive data and the more you use it and keep it exposed in an environment such as a cloud environment, then it is very important that you have those layers and layers. So protection in cybersecurity has become layers and layers. That's hard to do. So bad actors have figured out, why don't I just send you an email? That used to work back in the day. You'll click that, and all of a sudden the payload's there, and I'm in. That is still there. Now that's even advanced because we got really good at you hover. Remember, we all had the training. Hover over the site, and you see the address. Well, that's not Barry. That's Bum from whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not Barry's email address. We figured out how to do that, and we were very good at it. We noticed that they misspelled here, right? Well, we're happy to be here, HEAR. Well, really? Are you happy to be here? Okay, that can't be a real email. Now with AI, oh my goodness, all bets are off because someone, even from a different culture, can mimic not only your culture, but your style and dialect of speaking. They can take recordings, video recordings for publics. For example, if you have executives in your organization that on a regular basis produce videos, be them motivational videos, informational videos, marketing videos, that can then be pulled in, AI trained to mimic that voice. That voice can call you on the phone, okay, and say, hey, John, this is Barry. I have forgotten my daggone password. Could you do me a favor and send me yours and let me borrow that? Now, that's an exaggerated scenario. Even today, we wouldn't fall for that. But there are people who are falling for things like, hey, this is a voicemail from Barry. We've got, Nancy's celebration today because AI's let me know that there's a person in the room, in the office, who has a birthday that day. And because social media's talked about it, because we put everything on social media like it doesn't matter, that I know there's a birthday party going on in that office. So I call with the voice of the director and says, hey, Nancy's birthday party. I thought we'd do something special and get everybody some gift cards. Could you simply run down to Walmart and get me those? And then this is my wife's number. Could you send me the numbers on the back of that? There are people that are following that because the voice sounds so real. I recently had a bot come at me through a chat session where I was trying to get some help, and I recognized it as a fake. I'm like, holy crap, this is me. I'm getting caught up in the web here. And I said, well, let me stay here and see what this looks like, because I like putting myself in those situations so that I can share them with you and we can learn together from it. And I have a secret weapon that I use in those situations. I use nonsensical responses to the question of the bot. I think we may have somebody's got their microphone on, or if you'll mute that, that'll be great. So I have a secret weapon that I use, and I use nonsensical words. So in the middle of this stream that's pretending to be a real person, and it's a voice, right? I said chat, but it's actually a voice on a call. I just said barbecue sauce, right? Now, where do I get that? For those of you who are big fans of Ted Lasso, it's the final shot in the bullseye when he wins. That's barbecue sauce, right? He says it all the time. I just say barbecue sauce. And this person, a real sounding person, comes back and says, thank you, that's excellent, very much. Now could you do this? And I said, because no human being would go forward. They'd say, wait a minute, you said what? Barbecue sauce? Why are you saying barbecue sauce? So I do things like that, and I advise you too. If you're in a situation you think it could be AI, whether it's written or otherwise, put something out there nonsensical that they would have to respond and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. If you don't, you may find that you're a victim of some of that. So the world is changing with cybersecurity. Let's talk just a little bit. Let's get into some AI. The definition of AI, and I've used this analogy, and again, this is one of these sections I'll move through fairly quickly because you've heard it time and time again, right? What is artificial intelligence? For guys like John and I, we write code. We understand what all this stuff is that you look at it, it just looks like a bunch of numbers and letters and slashes and dashes and brackets. We get that. We can interpret it. For coders like us, AI means something different. It is literally a piece of software machinery without any assistance on its own, based on some algorithms, figuring things out and producing something that never existed out of its own without your interference. There's not a ton of that that's going on, or there wasn't. There's more now than there used to be. Most people are familiar with generative AI, ChatGPT, right? So essentially, they're both doing the same thing in a minute. They're mimicking human responses. In one case, it's really trying to mimic a human reaction. The other one is mimicking human tasks and actions. Most of us are familiar with that latter, right? So as we go through, my favorite one, and I just learned to do this, and if you haven't done this, here's a tip for you. I can't see all 300 and something of you, but if I said a show of hands, how many people use ChatGPT, Grok 4, or Copilot or something like that to help with some things? I think probably over 300 hands would probably go up. We've all been there. But I recently, somebody said, have you used it to help you with your Excel? And I said, no, I kind of use it instead of Excel on some things. Yeah, you should try it with Excel. So I went out there and said, look, I've got these 3 files, and I want to combine those into one. And I'd like to make a pivot table. In that pivot table, I'd like these to be the indexes in this, and then create a couple of graphs that are manipulated as I change data in that pivot table. How many people remember how to do pivot tables in Excel? A lot of people never even tried it, but they're very cool, very. The GPT that I was using, which was 5.0 on my own computer, generated the Excel file. The pivot table was like that, and it was perfect. I mean, it was spot on perfect. It would have taken me hours to do that, plus the training to get there. That's the most familiar. That's what we're used to with the generative AI. So in the retail market, finance market, transaction, transportation, community service, and even in healthcare for us, we're seeing that type of AI or generative AI used on a regular basis. But in the biomed field as well, we're starting to see more than just that generative AI. We're starting to see embedded and task-specific AI, right? We're starting to see things where vendors put it into their product. They call them unique or IP algorithms or intellectual property algorithms. But it's really using some of the same engines that we're doing, but their algorithms are written differently and they're producing different devices. It's very specific to what they're doing. Maybe it has to do with, we'll talk about some insulin pumps later on, or maybe it has to do with analyzing a slide to look and see if there's dysplasia in a cell that could be cancer, and comparing that with a human reaction to get you a better result. Now we're getting to the bio piece too. These are the ones that are more than just generative. These are very much embedded into what we're doing, and they're more to what AI was intended to do when it was first created. So AI is not a simple iterative improvement. And this is John. I give John credit for this. I've heard this before. John said, hey, we ought to share this. And I agree. Think about the candle, right? Go back in history, Google it. When was the candle invented? Centuries ago, literally centuries ago. Think about the time from when the candle was first invented, or something like that, to include oil from wells and things and wicks, to the time that we have the light bulb, when Edison said, oh, we have a light bulb, that period of time. And then compare that to the technology that we have from the light bulb to now. What AI is to our technology today is what the candle and the light bulb scenario, right? It wasn't a small leap. It was a massive leap, because once we had the light bulb, The candle was something that we did to make up to our wives when we forgot their anniversaries, right? It became a different tool. It wasn't to light the way down the hallway. It was to celebrate things, it acknowledge things. It was in ceremonies and things. It was not our primary source of light. AI is going to have that same kind and is trending that way. In the beginning, it was a nice tool. It was kind of fun to have, but we will no longer use the candle to go down. We will use the light bulb. AI is going to be in the center of what we do. It is a massive jump forward, and it is going to be something that's around. I predict that one day we won't even call it AI. It will simply be what we do. Excuse me. John, you want to talk about some key takeaways there?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Barry, for that overview. The bottom line when it comes to IoMT, the Internet of Medical Things or devices, biomed devices, those kinds of things, there are hundreds of thousands of those things deployed, as you know. There are millions of personal health devices, everything from your Apple Watch to your glucose monitor, insulin pumps that are, now you carry them with you and they do everything automatically. All of those kinds of things, they're all out there. It's not going to go away, right? And medical devices are no longer just at the bedside, right? Or patient adjacent. They are now actually patient embedded. Everything from, as I mentioned, glucose monitors, pacemakers, et cetera. The more these things are interconnected, the more they pose an inherent risk of either tampering or cyber attack, which makes them all the more risky, all the more important for not only organizations like and regulatory organizations like the FDA, but everyone who's involved in clinical healthcare needs to be and concern themselves with these things and how they're doing what they do, and how do you make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do and nothing more. So cybersecurity, because we have all of these devices and because they're interconnected, because they're software driven, cybersecurity now becomes patient safety. And it's no different and should be no different when we consider in a hospital setting, all of the attention that goes into fall prevention, to every other sort of clinical patient safety activity, positive bedside ID, and all of those kinds of things. Cybersecurity has got to take the same sort of place of paramount when it comes to patient safety. AI tools are here to stay. As mentioned, they're the next evolution of computing in the computing industry. There are thousands of approved AI-based medical devices already, and so it is a big field, and it is a big concern when we consider the risk from a cybersecurity and from an AI perspective, and what AI can and can't do, and can and can't do well. Barry?
Right, so there's kind of AI cybersecurity that kind of gets us up all on the same page. And again, I acknowledge some of you have heard this probably and acknowledge them from other presentations. Maybe you learned something new in there. We hope so. But let's talk about the flavor of today, right? This is the Food and Drug Administration's guidance on Internet of Medical Devices technology and how it interacts with cybersecurity. So go ahead and jump to the next slide, and we'll start talking about the well, let me give you this kind of overview. It's not on the slide, but this is back in January of January 25. Yeah, January 25. They put the guidance out there. There was a public comment. I think it ended around April 7th, if I'm not mistaken. 1,800 or so, probably a little more than that. Comments were put in there around the guidance, and we'll see what comes out in terms of a final and where we go from there. But the guidance is good. I've read through it. I think it gives some great tips. It certainly calls out some things around diligence that, and John, I'll go through that today. Diligence that not only you as the consumers and those that are in the market and the providers using these, but also some very good requirements and advice and guidance for the developers going into this. And we're gonna let you see that perspective. I think it'll be interesting to see how guys like John and I actually advise those who are developing it. That way it gives you some insight as to things you should be looking for before you buy it. But Machine learning and AI absolutely transforming healthcare. One of the first places that I saw it inside a hospital as a consultant working was in radiology. I think it was in an oncology space that I first saw it on the screen. This was a long time ago. And it was going out there and saying, look, these are some areas that I think deserve more attention. And this is probably a lesion here and this, that, and the other. And, back then it wasn't perfect. So we're going many years back. It wasn't perfect. Today it's used in radiology. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but man, it's good. And I get this from radiologists. I think there's a camp that says, look, I don't want as a practitioner who has the ability to look at more than what's on the screen and look at things around and have the human experience along with it. I don't want just a machine saying, these are all the polyps on this image. But I'd like to have it as a second. As the new generation is coming up, they're starting to look at as a new radiologist. Hey, show me the images. I'll see if I agree with it, sort of thing. Those are the two different camps, and there are people in both camps. So it's absolutely transforming how we use it in the devices. The thing that I like about AI embedded into the medical and biomedical devices is when it's connected correctly, and we'll talk about that in the future. And that is if the medical record is also providing, peripheral information into that image, it's the same thing a provider does when they're looking at the chart. They're not looking at one thing. They're looking at a matrix of information coming in that. And it's not that one's better than the other. I think the personal touch of it, personally, I like to see a man or a woman looking at my chart and making a medical decision for me and engaging me in that decision to find out if maybe there's something, and this is important, that I haven't shared that's not in the chart. That is something AI can't do. Now, one day that may be a robot in front of me asking that question too. But for today, to sit down and look at my chart, look at the results, and have that interaction with me, and pull something new into the equation, said, "Oh, well, you didn't give me in that. We didn't get that in your history physical, Barry. That makes a difference. Let me add that to the mix, and I think here's what the param is going to be for your care." But absolutely, it does make things faster. So even in where we're using in the clinical spaces, it's not that it's more accurate or better, but it certainly is getting some things done faster. So it helps those who are trained, educated, and have a heart and a passion to take care of that patient, which AI will never do, in my opinion. It gives them the ability to get there sooner to help with that care path. So I think that's what's interesting about it. The cybersecurity challenges. Bad people are bad people. We call them bad actors for a reason, because they're pretending to be something they're not. They're really bad. And if they can somehow create a situation for you where they're giving you false information or ruining the data that you make a bad decision, that's where reliance on AI, I think, is always going to be that challenge. If you get too reliant on it and you can't see where a bad actor has sullied the data, then all of a sudden you've made a decision with bad data. And those are some of the places where bad actors understand. And if they can simply, if the AI engine that you have is based on a training model, if a bad actor can get access to that training model and ruin the results, then you can't use it until they get you the other copy. So backing up things with AI, like everything else, is going to be very important. But that's where bad actors are already thinking. And then surgical, and that is, if you don't imagine this, and this is theoretical, okay, but imagine this: instead of getting a message that says we have ransomware your Cerner, your Epic, or your Athena, or your ECW, and you can't have it back, imagine getting a message that simply says, I have infiltrated all of your AI biomedical devices, and I will give erroneous results that will harm a patient at 12 o'clock today if you don't send 1,000 Bitcoins to this address. Your clock has started now. One, do you even have time to prove that they have or they haven't? Because the ability to do that is what we're focused on. Could they do that? And the answer is they possibly could. So that's the future of cybersecurity and our protection and AI, and it is very scary. They don't call me Scary Barry for nothing. Regulatory oversight, as you start to use it, as the federal government has done in every other case, the more we start to use it and interact, especially with Medicare and Medicaid patients, there needs to be some oversight here. We need to make sure that you're doing this right, and a lot of it's focused on the usage of it, as well as getting paid for the usage of it, quite honestly, if you're on the business side of this. And we experienced some of that even during COVID. We had an emergency where we had to use some technology in order to treat a patient. And the question was, well, in the past, you had to do it this way to get paid, but now you can do it this way. So getting paid for what we're doing is absolutely in the mix, and it has some regulatory oversight fingers in that as well. So AI and machine, well, did I go forward and you went backwards? Okay. John and I are fighting over the next button. Look, we've known each other for 30 years. We've been fighting over food and everything else for all those years as well. So they laid the groundwork in 2023, right, with threat modeling. And then the guidance came out this year in 2025 and makes these elements and things kind of mandatory going forward. When that happens, I don't know where the final is going to be. But again, we talked about the April date being the end of the comments, 1,800 comments in there. It typically takes them a while to get through the comments because, believe it or not, and I have some very good acquaintances in that space, they really do read and consider the comments, which is one reason we may never see the final HIPAA rule, because there was almost 47 or 4,500 comments on that one to get through that one. So we're still waiting on that one. But we're in that waiting stage to see what happens. But they're really focused on secure product development framework. So as much as we want to say the FDA is in the hospitals and the user side, really they're focused on those who are developing this. The FDA guidelines, what they're trying to do is make sure, as you, the consumer of these devices that are now using AI, can rely that they have been through proper testing and procedures and the frameworks to make sure they're hardened against some of these attacks, that they have the ability to identify and cut things out if they need to in terms of cutting off attacks and things. So the software bill materials in 2025, that now requires all cyber devices, including component details, end of lifetime, all this kind of thing, to be embedded in. It requires them to do threat modeling, detailed labeling requirements, so that it's more universal, so that you get something from China or Turkey, it's the same requirements on labeling and communication as this from the United States, right? So there's the FDA is not letting things in unless they meet these standards, which is what we want the FDA to do, right? Unfortunately, it takes some time. And in this case, the hockey stick, the curve, right? That hockey stick where we're adapting an AI and wanting AI, it's a steep, giant climb to the roof. So my fear is, do we have enough time to get it the way we are, which is why John and I are going to continue to talk to you about things you should be looking for as you bring AI in. We're doing it again, aren't we, John? Okay.
There you go.
So the regulatory focused areas, it's about transparency, bias mitigation. What bias mitigation is, if you're using AI in an analysis state, that it's somehow got the right bookends to it, so you're not leaving out a particular demographic or population. There was a very famous university on the West Coast. They were the first ones to notice that some of the bias. They had done this study around patients, and they were already using it in their system. And some smart person noticed that there's no males from 50 to 55 included in this sort of thing. They're like, well, that's odd. How can that population not have this disease? That's crazy. And they realized that in the algorithm, it was an accidental built in. So the results were biased, that it didn't have a particular demographic in there, but yet, and man, this is key. So this is where Barry scoots closer to this. He says, listen, this is one of these tips of the day. When generative AI or even embedded AI presents its results, it doesn't say, I think this is the answer. It might be the answer. You could check this. No. It presents as if it just written gospel, right? It's like, this is the answer. A lot of people don't realize that even GPT has a limit in terms of the amount of records it can see to give you an accurate answer. That's true. If you don't know that, you do your own research there, but it doesn't tell you that. It simply gives you an incomplete answer, and doesn't tell you that I had too much information to go through, so I didn't go through that. I went through this. Close enough. You'll be good. No. It presents as if it's final. So that's the same thing with the regulatory focus, they want to make sure that's being taken care of. And then the life cycle, just like any software, right? There's an SDLC, software development life cycle. It's a big auditor thing. I've audited SDLCs for applications, EMRs. Well, now we have the total product life cycle for the FDA. That's something that's been around for a while. They want to make sure that things are built in there to catch the mistakes that AI may make. Performance monitoring, risk management, there needs to be tools. Really, what the federal government or the FDA is saying the same thing that OCR and HHS has been saying about the EMR. So they're going through some of the similar process when meaningful use. Go back, remember meaningful use, stage 1, 2, 3, now MIPS, right? The EMRs had to go through a certification process with the Office of the National Coordinator, started with David Blumenthal back in the day. To show that they were doing this. Well, this is similar to that, but it's the biomedical devices using AI are going to have to go through that same kind of that gauntlet to show the labeling and user interface. They need to make sure that the software versions and history, these are programming things. John and I understand these. We're not going to bore you with them. They just want to make sure that they're living up to programming and labeling standards. And then the cybersecurity integrations there. And then, they want to make sure that you're staying in touch with the FDA, especially if you're early adopting. The FDA has now basically come out and said, look, if you're doing IP or intellectual property development around new AI tools, you need to let us know and let's have some insights in there. That'll be a challenge because, again, in a free market industry, we don't always want to run to the federal government and say, I've got something that's going to change the world. No, typically we wait till we produce it, and then the federal government says, hey, your thing that's changing the world might be hurting the world. We need to get involved, and that's always going to be the challenge. All right, so the life cycle. So we talked about the life cycle and cybersecurity integration. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so so in looking at the two draft guidances that have come out, one on cybersecurity for medical devices, as well as the one regarding AI-enabled medical devices that Barry just gave us an overview of both of those. When we look at the AI-enabled medical devices lifecycle, one of the key components of the guidance is to adopt a total product lifecycle. So we just wanted to drill down into that just a little bit. What the guidance says is that sponsors should be taking a risk-based design approach, meaning that a secure approach to everything from design of not just the physical device, but certainly the software, all the way through implementation needs to have security, cybersecurity, and other risk-based criticality, risk-based management, risk-based mitigations. All of that needs to be included from the get-go, from design, mark on the whiteboard, stage 1. This is what we want to develop, right? The guidance says that the developer must consider bias mitigation, as Barry just mentioned, transparency, and explainability. What this ultimately means is you've got to figure out a way to explain to the average clinical person, be it a nurse, doctor, what have you, or a biomed tech, or somebody in the life cycle, the users for the life cycle of that product, that they understand what it can do and what it can't do. There's nothing worse than assuming, right, that the AI is going to do something for you when in fact it wasn't built for that and it's not fit for that purpose. So all the documentation has to include the model architecture. What model are you using? How did you train that model? What data? You have to keep track of what data you use to train that model. What's its intended use and its clinical context? What's the clinical outcomes? What's the clinical inputs that are necessary? All of those things have to be taken into consideration, have to be well documented, and also have to be submitted as part of your pre-market submission to the FDA, which from an end user perspective is good, right? We want vendors to be able to document all of that, have a considered approach to the way in which they develop their products that we're going to use to take care of our patients. From a pre-market submission perspective, the FDA is expecting that you will also provide performance testing. So how did this model perform? You can imagine a device, maybe a bedside device. That device is big enough to have an onboard AI model. It's all just a matter of processing power and memory. Whenever it can be a local model, it can run locally. We'll talk about it in a minute, but it's going to have to call home at some point. But all of that can be done locally. But if you consider an implantable like pacemaker, glucose monitor, any of those kinds of things, the AI that's running on those might actually run on a smartphone or some external device and not on device itself. All of that has to be included in the performance testing to make sure that it is, again, fit for purpose and going to give the clinically accurate result. The FDA is expecting cyber assessments, mitigations, and controls. This is important. This is no different than what you do every day as either risk managers or in IT, where you are managing your risk by assessing your risk, constantly assessing your risk, looking at those vulnerabilities that come up from those assessments, mitigating against those, and making sure that you have proper controls to maintain those mitigations. Interoperability, you have to disclose and describe how your product works from an interoperability perspective. So is it just network enabled? Is it cloud enabled? Does it connect to other third parties? Does it pull information, as Barry mentioned, from your EMR in order to make a decision? All of those things need to be included in your pre-market submission, along with a very detailed software bill of materials. So this is everything from not just the AI model, but all of the underlying software. So that includes whether or not you're running Linux or some other specially embedded code, and what vulnerabilities there are and potential attack vectors associated with those aspects of your bill of materials. So a software bill of materials, you might think, oh, well, it's the operating system, it's the database, and it's the AI model in this scenario. But the reality is, instead of being 3 things, it's about 3,000 things, because everything that's associated with the operating system, the libraries, some people do write original code these days, but what you're really doing is you're tacking on code that someone else has written, subroutines as it were. You're calling out to those bits. You've purchased those, or they are publicly available. If you use any of those sort of libraries, whether they be Java or Go or Swift, any of those kind of libraries that are available to you, all of that has to be included in your SBOM. And it's very, very important that it be there. Change control plans for future updates. This is important because there's a inherent recognition that whereby you could set a medical device that doesn't have any AI on it. You could set that aside and never connect it to the network, and it would perform on day 365 as well and as accurately as it did on day 1. But with an AI model that is constantly trying to learn and constantly trying to adapt, it can shift. It can do all kinds of things. It can infer incorrectly. It can do a lot of things on its own, and therefore there needs to be an identified change control plan for how are you going to patch the software in the SBOM, but also how are you going to mitigate against poisoning of data, shifting of the AI model, and the like. So all of that is necessary for, according to the guidance, for your AI-enabled device. When it comes to post-market monitoring, this gets into that aspect of it that I was just mentioning, which is you have to detail how are you going to monitor the device that as it operates in the real world. You have to be able to detect and respond to model drift, as I just mentioned. You have to be able to detect and know that in my SBOM, this publicly available library that we use, like maybe the Print Nightmare library or the Log4j Nightmare that we had a few years back that still haunts us, by the way, today, because Log4j is used everywhere. You might have that. There might be a new known vulnerability. Well, because now your device is connected to the cloud, or it's connected to the network for other reasons, because it needs to be monitored, it needs to be updated, it needs to be all those things. Now you're suddenly exposing that vulnerability to potential exploitation. So again, you have to describe in your post-market monitoring how you're going to do post-market monitoring with the FDA to manage against those cybersecurity vulnerabilities. You have to communicate updates and the risk to users. So users have to be actively informed. This device is now, we see that this device or this version of this device or et cetera is ready for routine maintenance, or it needs some routine maintenance, or it needs critical maintenance, because we know that it's got model drift that is causing it to make ill-informed clinical decisions. And you have to be able to communicate that, not just to biomed, but whoever else is necessary to know that, so that that device can either be put into practice or taken out of practice, as the case may be. The last bit of the total product lifecycle is change management. So the FDA, for those of you who are aware, they do, we all know that in trying to get a device FDA certified, it is a Byzantine process, right? And it can be a nightmare of red tape. So, and it can take a long time. In fact, the comments associated with, some of the comments associated with this draft guidance have been around exactly that. How do we continue to foster innovation with small startups or other small companies that want to enter into the medical device space when the cost of entry is so high because the administrative burden is so high just to get approval, right? So we all know that's a reality. So one of the things, though, that the FDA does support is the PCCP, the Predetermined Change Control Plan. And if you can get that approved, and you should get that approved for your device, it will assist you in making sure that any product changes you need to make over that total product life cycle, that you can get those done quickly without having to go back through and start over again from your pre-market submission and all the way through to the end. These plans should outline what changes are expected in the AI model updates and patches, those kinds of things. How are they going to be validated? And then how are the risks mitigated? All of that stuff. If you can define all of that sufficiently enough in your change management plan, then you can get a predetermined change control plan approved, and then your changes will happen at least somewhat faster and get to the device sooner. So when it comes to cybersecurity and IoMT devices, obviously any device that is connected is suddenly at a higher risk level, right? So we're not talking about just being connected to each other or just being connected within the system, the health system, but if they are connected to the network, or they're connected to the internet for any reason, or to a cloud, even if it's a private, HIPAA compliant cloud, it increases its risk just for the fact that it's connected. And of course, IoMT devices are connected. The risk associated with that, as we've talked about, ransomware, unauthorized access, data manipulation, all of these threaten patient safety. If a person can ultimately get into the device or manipulate the device, if they know sufficient information about the AI model and the signals or the variables it uses in order to make a clinical decision, and they can poison that, then ultimately that presents a huge risk for these devices. From the regulatory requirements, mandating cybersecurity controls, the software bill of materials, the risk assessments, and the pre-market assessments, security protocols include everything from communication, data encryption, access controls are essential for maintaining device integrity. All of that, again, is rather basic blocking and tackling. But the guidance does advance these topics for FDA approval of AI-enabled and cybersecurity devices. So with that being said, let's talk about a hypothetical smart insulin pump. Barry?
So John and I chose the insulin pump because whether it's you or somebody in your family, we've likely been around it for years. So if you look at someone who has a medical condition with their glucose, you may, back in the day, my dad would prick his finger and put it on there and put it in a little monitor. It would tell him, then my dad had to do it. So it was filled with tasks, right? It's just a task, prick your finger, do this. Well, then we advanced to, well, maybe we can take out the prick your finger. That was a marketing thing. So now you have these discs, you put them on there, and it has a continuous little needle in there, and it's pulling the blood, and dad can put the phone up to it and he can look at it, but that is still filled with tasks, right? So they're still putting that on and things and then looking at it, then he has to react to it, eat or not eat. So for those who require, because it is so sensitive, to have an insulin pump, the next step would be the insulin pump would maybe interface in with the phone or something like that, but there's still humans kind of involved in all this. So a next generation insulin pump, right? The glucose combined with the glucose monitoring, with access to an EMR, with access to maybe the dietary things, that's going to the case there. I think there's a couple of these in the market already, John. I think you and I talked about that before that. There's a couple of these going on. You can actually have a patient who is pretty much kind of fire and forget, self-sufficient. They've got their device that tests their glucose. It's hooked up to the insulin pump. So the pump itself, without any interaction, says, hey, this is going on. I'm going to give you a little glucose and kind of keep your vitals where they need to be, your blood sugar where it needs to be, and that sort of thing. And as that advances, there's those who are thinking, wow, maybe there's a day where even that gets better to where the devices are going to get smaller. There's embedded devices, all kind of things that are going on, and can actually talk to the rest of your medical record. Or if you're keeping, in some cases, if you're using the Bluetooth version now, you can actually record what you're eating, and there's some things that go on. There's just a lot of that could happen as well. Within that, the predictive modeling, supervised learning, to get this to happen, essentially what they've done is they force-fed it in one case. When they first started this, they force-fed it the information. They trained it. Here's everything you need to know about how to react to a glucose level. And then there's the adaptive algorithms where it continuously says, okay, thank you for sharing this, but I'm learning this about Barry and his dietary. I'm learning this. I've learned based on a reaction that even though the glucose requirement may be this, I don't think I was a pump. I'm going to give him that much this time because he had a bad reaction. And over time, it becomes my specific pump to my specific type to what's going on. That's the adaptive. And it personalized that and trades it to me. That's the future of biomed devices, especially wearables, attachables, and things. So it's pretty exciting, but it doesn't come without risks. John, you go ahead there. So if you're connected via Bluetooth Wi-Fi, the pump could, look, it's going to be vulnerable. Like John mentioned, if you're connected to other things that are connected, then there's going to be vulnerability. So making sure the protection for that vulnerability to prevent it or notify you or do something about it is absolutely paramount. It could be model poisoning. We talked about that. In this case, the glucose readings could be the algorithms that do that could be damaged or wrong, or maybe it received a bad update and nobody was notified, and all of a sudden somebody gets a massive dose and they're diabetic. It could be life-threatening. Denial of service, where basically attackers can come in and just stop the information altogether and say, hey, look, you've got 300 patients or 3,000 patients that are on this that are using it. Now we're talking future, and we basically shut off the information so nobody will do anything until you pay me. That is a vulnerability. And then, of course, privacy breaches is always there, just getting the information attached to it. One links to another. My favorite story of one links to another is one of the biggest modern day financial heist of Las Vegas came because a third-party company installed, of all things, a pH monitor in a giant fish tank for a lobby of a hotel. Well, they didn't protect that, so bad actors were able to get access to the pH monitor in the fish tank into the security of the hotel systems, and they exploited millions of dollars away from this casino. Now, the casino never noticed it, we know that, but it was still millions of dollars, and they got to it through the fish tank. So how things are connected are very important. So the FDA has basically said, look, we need to make sure you validate those AI algorithms to against and demonstrate consistent performance across areas to make sure, at least if something's noticed, it gets notified and there's a mitigation for that. Document the cybersecurity controls. You ought to be upfront. You have to be upfront with what it can and can't do with that. Provide software, bill materials, implement encryption, all these kind of things that you expect. They're commonplace today. You don't put anything on your body that's connected to the internet that you're sure that there's some cybersecurity protection in there. And then post-market monitoring, again, much like it comes from the system device, the life cycle of the biomed devices, the IoMT or IoMTs, and that is making sure that somebody somewhere is monitoring whether it's working, right? Is it happening every day? The point is, when the human's doing it, right, and we've had friends on glucose monitors, and we can even be at the restaurant with them and see them say, hey, or out with them somewhere, say, hey, I think, I have a dear friend myself, you may need to eat something there, something's going on. And if they're wearing that, if we're going to turn all that over, to artificial intelligence to help us with that, then we better darn be sure that the proper monitoring and things are in place to make sure that if there's a change that happens or something, that it is also part of the monitoring and can be quick or mitigated quickly. So I don't think we're going to go we're right at the edge of replacing everything that's out there with AI, but we are experimenting with that. Like I said, in this particular case, there's already a couple of vendors that have this marriage out there between a glucose monitoring and an insulin pump, so that it's kind of self-sufficient. That is already happening.
So so Barry mentioned, using these devices en masse, perhaps in a hospital setting or that kind of thing, but just further taking this to a patient safety perspective. Assume for a moment that this is just one device at home that, your grandmother's using or what have you, and someone is able, because they've used AI to figure out how to hack into these devices, and through the cell phone or through some other connected device on your grandmother's network at home, like your TV or something, they're able to get in, see that the traffic from that device, and manipulate that data, or just to say, I've got control of it, I know I can manipulate it, and then I'm going to send your grandmother a ransom note. I'm not asking for millions of dollars from the health system. I'm asking for $10,000 from your grandmother so that her insulin pump works, right? So there's those kinds of situations that can happen as well. One of the items I wanted to highlight too was model drift. So in this scenario, for this case study, you have a situation where the AI model is taking these signals, these inputs from all kinds of things, as Barry mentioned, from your diet, from your activity level, how often you eat, what you're eating, those kinds of things. It can take all those signals and decide optimally when to give you the dosage, but also what dosage to give you. But model drift is a situation where let's assume that you do have a high sugar lunch 3 times a week on average. And the model begins to assume that that is a regular pattern for you. And then it begins to make an assumption about when to give you dosages based on past patterns. And it could be wrong, because the Wednesday that you don't go and have dessert after lunch might be the Wednesday that your pump decides, hey, I know that I'm expecting him to have a sugar spike at 3 o'clock. I need to do this, right? Or a sugar low, or whatever the case may be, right? So when it comes to mitigating against these, this is why it's important to, from design, conception, all the way through, especially around the AI algorithm itself, that there are good controls for how to manage against things like model drift, manage against things like bias in the data, or it trying to make a determination based on certain demographics, Barry's of this age, John's of this size, that kind of thing, and then making some general, population analysis against that, and then trying to make a bad clinical intervention on that. All of those things are important that it be taken into consideration, and that's what the FDA guidance ultimately is trying to address, is making sure that vendors are covering all of that in the total product lifecycle. So when it comes to the sort of concluding thoughts on all of this, I think we've pointed out, and I hope that you realize that AI, machine learning, connected medical devices, all of this is a leap forward for the healthcare industry, whether it's in terms of diagnostics, quality of monitoring, personalized healthcare, quality of life, right, for individuals with chronic disease. All of those kinds of things are truly, truly important. They're goals, industry goals, right? And when it's all said and done, AI can help us get there, and connected devices can help us get there. Regulatory and cybersecurity challenges are real, right? When we have emerging technologies, we must consider the challenges of cybersecurity, the threat landscape that forces complex regulatory oversight. And that's important, right? Going all the way back to when HIPAA was proposed, back to even other industries like the banking regulations from the 80s and all of that. And I'm not casting dispersions because I'm part of the industry, right? But the healthcare industry ultimately didn't react fast enough, right, as an industry in terms of monitoring itself and controlling itself with good frameworks, good, sort of self healing kind of situations and models and all of those kinds of things. And so the government felt they needed to step in, right? And that's why we have regulatory oversight. We would all probably like less regulatory oversight in our lives, but when it's all said and done, everybody's going to operate on the least common denominator, right? And so the government is just simply trying to raise the denominator in terms of awareness for things that have AI and are embedded and connected medical devices. The framework for safe innovation, the FDA guidance on AI devices and IoMT and cybersecurity. It offers a comprehensive framework for product lifecycle development, patient safety, and suitability. All of this is important for making sure that the devices do what they say they do and they don't introduce harm, right? Do no harm, right? As the case may be. We want these devices to help, not harm. Collaboration and compliance, making sure that there's proactive compliance and regulatory collaboration as early in the process as possible is key to make sure that ultimately patient safety is at the forefront of everyone's mind. Barry?
One more slide there.
Oh,
here we go. So what I want to do with this slide here is, if you're a developer, these are the things you're going to have to do, right? If you're going to get something through the FDA approval process and it has AI integrated in with the biomed technology piece, you're going to have to do these things. You're not going to have a choice. The reason we're sharing them with you is these are the things you should be asking for and expecting as you're reviewing these. But so real quickly, secure product development, they want to make sure you're following a systematic life cycle. We've talked about that all through this presentation. That is going to be a requirement. Regulatory engagements, they're going to want you to get them involved early as you're doing this, especially if it's something that maybe you can't put the right controls in based on the way they've done it, because the regulatory pieces don't always match up with how we think and what we're doing. You need to be involved with those early on and submit and follow approved, predetermined change controls with the FDA in that process. Post-market surveillance, they're going to absolutely make these vendors that are putting these together continuously monitor device performance. They're going to make sure that they look at timely emerging cybersecurity threats, because the cybersecurity landscape changes daily. And I interact with a lot of bad actors and spaces out there doing cyber threat intelligence. And I'm telling you, they're as crafty as anybody else. They're thinking hard on how do we get access to these things. And then the user education, absolutely, they're going to want to have part of the rollout is that those who are using it know its limitations as well as the things it can do to help with what it's designed to do. So with that, John, we have one more thing. John, you want to do that?
Yeah. So when I love Steve Jobs. I think he was a visionary. I'm no Steve Jobs. I don't like wearing turtlenecks. But I love the way that he would always end his presentations with, and there's one more thing, right? So in that vein, Barry and I wanted to talk a little bit about how this impacts you as users of these devices and some of the things that you need to concern yourself with as users of these FDA-approved AI-enabled devices. So one of the key things is it is important that you include your medical devices, especially those that are connected, those that are AI enabled, in the scope of any of your risk governance, the purview of the CISO, in your employee training activities where appropriate. All of that needs to be considered at the organizational level. These devices are no longer just simple black boxes that let a drip happen or whatever the case may be. They are active, engaged, internet connected or network connected devices that need this level of governance. These medical devices, they need regular risk assessments to identify vulnerabilities, and then those vulnerabilities have to be remediated, right? So there's nothing worse than assessing a vulnerability and then not actually remediating against it. So again, this is working with your biomed vendor, working with the biomed tech team, whoever that is, to make sure that these things are risk assessed on a regular basis and that those vulnerabilities are closed. This next one is, I think, critical, and this is one that to be honest with you, there needs to be a little more thought process put into this, because this is going to impact the industry, I think, industry-wide. Clinical staff have to be trained how to spot deviations in the care that these devices are providing. And that goes back to both the vendor, who has to provide all of the detailed documentation, training materials, et cetera, on what this device does and how it works and all of that. But clinical staff should be regularly reviewing any clinical interventions that these devices perform to make sure that there's not something like a model drift or some sort of bias that's been introduced into the situation, any of those kinds of things. So, and it can't just be that suddenly a patient's declining health is the indicator that something's not right with this device, right? So there has to be some proactive look. And so from my perspective, this has the potential, while AI has the potential to assist the frontline clinical staff, nursing staff, et cetera, with what they do on a patient care basis, their responsibilities are going to shift slightly to be, for lack of a better term, sort of in the metasphere, right? Looking at what these devices are doing, re-reviewing, perhaps signing off, maybe even having formal sign-offs, a checkbox that says, yes, I agree with this clinical intervention that the AI is going to do, and before the AI can do it, right? So even having that kind of control might be possible, might be necessary depending on the situation and the type of device. Monitoring federal alerts for third-party threat intelligence. This is important. Not too long ago, some of you may know of this, there was a Chinese medical device manufacturer that actually had a backdoor built into their software where it would call home to a prefixed IP address and deliver medical information, patient information, et cetera, back to that vendor. Not good, right? All that stuff has to be, and that came out in a CISA alert. So actively monitoring those things, again, tying that into your CISO and their responsibilities to make sure that they are watching out the threat intelligence to watch out for these kinds of things and these kinds of exploits. Ensure a deep and trusted partnership with your biomed vendor and support staff. Whether your biomed vendors are in-house employees or they come from GE or a third-party provider of your biomed staff, whatever the case may be, you need to make sure that the biomed staff is properly trained and that they are kept up to date on all things related to AI-enabled devices. From a technical perspective, this is just basic hygiene, right? Making sure that the minimal necessary access for users and patients is all that is granted. Those devices should be so locked down, and we call it privileged access management, right? So they should, anyone who needs privileged access should have to go through a very controlled process in order to get that level of access on these devices. And patients and users, general users, should be limited accordingly. Minimal necessary access to network segments, the cloud, et cetera. So if your vendor says you should lock this down to just this cloud address, you should lock this down to these IP addresses, you should lock it down on a network segment solely of its own within your network. Take that advice, do those things. Do not introduce extra risk where it's unnecessary or against guidance from the vendor in order to minimize the risk of an attack vector. Include your IoMT devices in your regular patch management activities. So IT does regular server management, patch management. They send out patches to computer devices and all of that. There should be a close collaboration with Biomed to make sure that however Biomed is doing those patches, that there's a proper policy, that there's a proper procedure, and that there's proper governing of that procedure and evidence of that procedure, that patching is actively happening on these AI-enabled medical devices, and that it can be attested to and assured in a risk survey or in an audit. It is likely, if it hasn't already happened, JCO, DNV, and the like will start including some of that in evidence for quality checks. Third-party risk, make sure, and this is really, really key, and Barry can expand on this too, but make sure that the vendor that you are buying these devices from are properly vetted. Read and understand fully the contract clauses. There is a lot of T's and C's in these contracts, And the ones that are important are how they use your data. Does your data get sent back, even de-identified from these devices? Does it get sent back to the manufacturer, to the vendor? All of that needs to be vetted properly, and the contract language properly redlined accordingly, et cetera, for what you're comfortable with. And ultimately, if you're not comfortable, you have to be willing to say, we cannot deploy these devices. We're not going to buy them. They're too risky. Again, regular audits of your vendor, making sure that you're asking them, don't just simply take that. Now, you can take this with a grain of salt. Don't just simply take that because the FDA says it's okay, that device is always okay. Because those devices can change, especially if they've got a PCCP in place and you're 2-3 years into that device and it's been patched and changed a couple of times or whatever, you need to be doing regular audits with your vendor. They need to be attesting back to you to say, yes, these devices remain compliant. Yes, these devices remain fit for purpose. Compliance surveys, all of that to make sure that these devices remain fit for use and ultimately have patient safety forefront in its mind. Barry, any final thoughts?
Listen, final thought is thank you for sticking with us a little over there 5 minutes. Apologize for that. We typically try to keep it in that frame. If you hung out with us to the end, thank you again very much. If you have any questions around it, listen, myself, John, we work on this. PYAs all over this thing. We'd love to help you. Please send us your questions. We thank you for your attention and for hanging in there. We're going to turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this PYA webinar recast. The video recording, slides, and associated material for this and all PYA webinars are available on our website. If you have any questions or if we can help, please contact us at pyapc.com. Thank you again for joining us and have a great rest of your day.